Food is fuel for your body, your mind, and definitely your sport. But let's face it, nutrition is confusing, and the expectations on girls and women to be thin and have a six-pack are exhausting. If you've ever been frustrated with your body, confused about nutrition, obsessed with eating healthy, or guilty when you don't, underate, overate, or overtrained, and overwhelmed with all the pressure, then this podcast is for you. Nutrition can be easy. You can take control of it, but it might start with letting go of control by asking for help and making a change. I'm Lindsay Elizabeth Cortez, sports dietitian and owner of Rise Up Nutrition, where I empower female athletes to overcome nutrition concerns and perform at their highest level, to stop being confused by all the mixed or harmful messages, and finally have confidence in your body as a fierce, fit, and fueled female athlete. So welcome back, fans. I'm so excited because this is my very first episode with a guest, and go big or go home. I have a guest on who's 10,000 times more famous than I am, but she's a really important guest to have on the show. So we have Mary Cain. For those who might not know her, Mary Cain is a professional middle distance runner and Tracksmith New York City Manager. She was the youngest American to represent the U.S. at a World Championships meet back in 2013 at age 17. And she has run some really remarkable times and set records and distances from 800 meters to the 3,000 meters in the sport of track and field. In 2019, Mary publicly shared her story of the physical and mental abuse that she endured while at the Nike Oregon Project through a video op-ed with the New York Times. Since then, Mary has spoken out about her experiences with Red S, disordered eating, mental health, and has given a voice to female athletes who are struggling with these experiences themselves. In 2020, Mary entered races again, officially making kind of a professional comeback after a few years. And she's also one of my clients here at Rise Up Nutrition. So welcome, Mary, to the show.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Lindsay. And it's an honor to be your first of what I am sure will be many guests.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, go big or go home. We'll have Mary for the first one. So I'm sure that we will talk about your past because you have been so vocal about it in this past year, which has been amazing. But in all honesty, I kind of do want to talk a little more about you right now and what's going on in your life right now. So give us an update on things that the year 2020 has brought for you and how your life has changed since coming out with that story over a year ago.
Yeah, I think I can first off by saying 2020 has been very long. I have lived multiple lives over the course of 2020. In the beginning half, it was maybe kind of an aggressive push by me to really try to get back in shape in time for the trials. And when I shared my story with the New York Times in November of 2019, I had really only been running for about a month at that point and had a long ways to go in terms of the fitness game. And so in early 2020, I was racing myself to shape. Things were feeling really good. It was the first season that I was able to, finish in 3.5 to 4 years, finished up with a 9:07, world's my oyster, only up from there. And then lo and behold, COVID hit. And I was very fortunate to at the same time be signing an employee contract with Tracksmith, which is a running apparel brand in Boston, and therefore almost jumping into a full-time job in which not only my athletic career would be supported, but also during this time of tumultuous upheaval within not only the sports world, but the world at large, I was able to lock into a financial situation where I could maybe feel comfortable really fighting for this ability to stay in the sport of track and field and continue to progress as an athlete. And it was in particular helpful seeing as in July of this year, I had to get surgery. I had to get bilateral hip arthroscopic surgery because I had hip impingement. And I, as you can imagine, was incredibly disappointed to have that diagnosis, but I think it was kind of a long time coming. I kind of was feeling hip pain for a couple months, and there'd been kind of, on and off things before, never maybe had great range of motion in my hips. And so I was able to have both the flexibility and the support to say, this is the year to do it. let's just add to the pile that is 2020. And so really the last 4 months has been me rehabbing and getting back up to running. And I'm happy to say I'm doing that. And, in many ways feeling better than ever, probably because we've just been so smart and so slow with this buildup.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. As difficult as a year that it's been for so many people, and I wish it didn't happen. I wish COVID didn't happen. It has, as long as we're staying healthy and not getting COVID, it has provided kind of a press pause or reset for a lot of people to take care of themselves in different ways. And kind of like you said, this injury was maybe inevitable at some point. So kind of the perfect time.
Yeah, pretty much. Where, there had definitely been signs over the course of my indoor season where I would just to be blunt, go kind of numb in my hip.
Oh, wow.
And I think it was just from the bone growths, which is what caused hip impingement, kind of grinding against the labrum. And then my hip just being this is horrible. And so from my kind of perspective of last indoor, for running for 3 to 4 months healthy, finishing up the season with a 9:07 is not too shabby. But there also was this kind of concern of hey, is this a bigger issue? Is this something I'm going to have to deal with, as I'm going sub 9 and going 8:50 and 8:40? At what point does this almost cap my growth? And so, going into my doctor when he was well, you can choose not to have the surgery, but if you do that, it's kind of a matter of when you will ultimately have to do it versus if you'll have to get it down the road.
Not an if, it's a when.
Yeah. And so I was the when is now.
Yeah, absolutely. And because I know when you and I first started talking too, and this was kind of prior to getting this diagnosis at all, but your goal was, considering your past, was I want to approach running in the healthiest way possible. I have this injury history and we're going to move forward with no injuries, right? So obviously it was, I'm sure, difficult to get this news, but it's something that wasn't necessarily anything you did, right? Or I could even say that was done to you. It just was, right? There's some injuries that are just inevitable, being an athlete, overuse type stuff, and to be able to deal with it now. But that was your goal for sure, is what does injury-free Mary Cain look like?
Yes. And I think, almost that different word you used, or the semantics for me has always been, I don't call this an injury. I call it surgery, because to me, I think it changes the mindset that I have in terms of both emotionally and also physically responding to it. Because for right or for wrong, and I'm going to tell you, everybody, this is for wrong, what I'm about to say. Okay. But I think we all kind of hold a little bit of a guilt once we get hurt. Traditionally, if you get injured, there's this what did I do wrong? And you can always learn from it. And sometimes there are things that, looking back, you probably should change. But it's a whole collection of work. It's your whole support team. It's your whole network. It's kind of everybody who has to learn from an injury. It's not just on you. And I feel for something like my surgery, it was a little bit more crap, we could have done everything right, and this was probably going to happen. And as a result, during the rehab phases, I think I treated it less feeling sorry for myself and more thinking, yes, okay, now we're really going to never have to have a problem again.
Yeah.
That's very wishful thinking. Sometimes you just trip and fall and something happens, but definitely health is my number one priority, which is why I made the choice to have surgery to continue to long-term have the best health.
I think that's such a good point, that in any injury situation, there's something to be learned from it, not just yourself, not to put it all on yourself. What did I do wrong? Blah, blah, blah. But what can we as a team learn from this, and how can we move forward? And then the second part of it too, like you were saying, this is nothing that you did. This was just something that happened, something that is of being an athlete on a much smaller scale. I can relate to that. I had this extra bone in my foot a few years ago, 6 years ago. So when I went to run my first marathon, it was just inevitable. This extra bone in my foot just couldn't handle that much time on the pavement and totally wrecked my foot and ended in surgery as well. It was like, it was just inevitable. It was just going to happen. So we have to deal with those things.
Yeah. And I think it's been, my past injuries have helped me for this moment, where I was having a conversation with my coworker the other evening, and there was a certain point where he's like, "You are being a little too positive. Like, come on, there's gotta be some negativity here." And of course, yes, yeah, I was sad, I was stressed, all of the normal healthy emotions that come with not being able to run. But the truth is, I think I knew negativity completely hurts your ability to heal, first and foremost, and then secondarily hurts your motivation, so that, those little things like you're supposed to do, like the rehab and the extra strength training and, doing these silly little exercises where you're like, fit me would demolish this exercise.
Yeah.
You almost commit to it more by looking at it with a growth mindset versus really kind of a results exclusively oriented mindset.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel you on those little rehab exercises. They're so silly and so challenging.
I literally today was in PT. I now go really weekly just to make sure everything's progressing well, and just long term also to continue to stay healthy. And I was doing some very small movement today, just like extreme range of motion movement. And there was another person in there, and I'm like, I swear, this looks really easy, but I am struggling.
Yeah. I'm sure a lot of us have been there before with those rehab and physical therapy exercises. It's so funny. So with that, like you mentioned earlier this year as well, is your new position. And so what's so interesting is it's like you are an athlete with Tracksmith, I don't know if I'm using the terminology right, but it's like they're your sponsor, but it's also like an actual like job that's not just based on your performance. And to my knowledge, this is really unique in professional athletics. So can you tell us a bit about kind of what that means to you to have your job and your role, be as a professional athlete, but almost like so much more than that, and how that compares to some of your past experiences?
Yeah, so it's honestly been incredible working with Tracksmith. I think had I not been on the team, when I was having surgery, I think even some of that positivity that I felt around the operation would have not been there, because totally honestly, when I called them all up, I'm nervous because I'm like, I've only been here for 4 months and I have to tell them I'm having surgery. And I get on the call and I'm probably sweating and I'm like, okay, I'm getting surgery. Their reaction was immediately like, oh, we're so sorry. That's okay. How can we help? Do you want cookies? We can send you cookies. Like, what's going on? And my teammate and coworker, Nick Willis, was like, oh, I had that 10 years ago. You're going to be fine. You're younger than me when I had it. So it was just immediately positivity. And so I think what has changed for me by joining Tracksmith is, one, I have this purpose in the sport that's, I guess bigger now than what I used to have as just an athlete. And I think even some of the work that I have done in terms of advocacy work is beyond fulfilling. But totally frankly, a lot of it's my own time, a lot of it's charitable work, a lot of it's, very emotionally heavy for me. And so it's nice to be able to have a job that I am paid to do that is very fun, only positive stuff, and my running is supported. So it's kind of this like best of all worlds, so that then other passions like I have, such as my advocacy work, don't necessarily kind of fill up my whole day, and I can kind of shut both my running brain off and my advocate brain off, and sometimes just go to work and join my team calls. And it almost prevents you from moping around if you had a bad run because you just have to hop on a call.
Oh, this is so important, because I think with professional athletes and potentially even like collegiate level athletes, so much of your day and your identity is just surrounded by just being an athlete and feeling those pressures of that stack up. And they're external pressures from your team and your coach, and also internal. Any athlete knows, like, the person yelling at you the loudest and screaming at you to do better is always the voice coming from inside. So like that pressure stacking up. And then, like you said, the advocacy work you're doing is very emotionally charged. And so finding other outlets. And I think this is a lesson for anybody to just kind of diversify yourself a little bit. And I think that's really cool that Tracksmith, your job, is like creating that space for you.
And I think part of it too is that as an athlete, if you are the most elite of elite, right, and you're in the sport of track and field, you're like max doing stuff for 4 hours. Like, it's not that much time. And there's a lot of days where, you can stretch while being on a call. Like, some of the almost time consuming work that we have to do is really more the runs, the lift, the recovery routines, whether that's yoga, stretching, Pilates, or, sitting in your compression boots, and then just seeing people like a physical therapist, massage therapist. Those are kind of the 4 things. And if each of them take an hour every day and you don't do all of these things every day, that's 4 hours. So there's just a lot of time left for you to overthink things. And as a young athlete, I was told by the previous program that I was a part of that dumb athletes are better than smart athletes. And it's because they can shut their brains off and just do what they're told. And naturally, as a 4.0 nerd, that freaked me the hell out, because I'm like, no, I want to learn. I want to know everything. And so for me, I think there's a certain point where it's just important to know what's good for you and what's bad for you. And I've learned that, maybe there are some athletes who can just really shut off and watch TV for 4 hours. But, I'm the person who's like, I have to stretch, or I have to be reading something, or like, I almost find it hard not to multitask. And sometimes you shouldn't. Sometimes you should calm the heck down. But in a general sense, I think being able to have meaning outside of your running, or even your relationships, is very rewarding. And it makes me feel like I'm contributing something more tangible to our community as runners, versus good performances, which come and go. And sometimes you read the results and you're like, well, that did nothing for the world. And, like, not to be pessimistic, but I almost want my results to matter, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. And I think that's what definitely a lot of people would want too. And I think what you're hitting on is so important. I'm thinking about a lot of clients that I work with in the space of athletes with eating disorders. So much of that does stem from this just like obsessiveness of eating and training and exercising. And that is something that with almost all of my clients, that I'm like urging them to find those areas of their life that maybe they haven't been giving attention to. If all of their time is spent thinking about food and training, there's so many areas of your life that you're missing out on. And so exploring that. And I actually just released a podcast episode about when you're going through like eating disorder recovery, should you stop exercise or not, and kind of like the pros and cons of that. And one pro to kind of like setting aside exercise or your sport is to explore all those other things, to expand your mind again, to kind of separate that, like, you don't need to be an athlete to still have a life that's worth value, and to give something to the world and to have meaning in this world outside of your sport. And I think that's so important. And I'm curious too, Mary, because obviously you're running and you're kind of finding a way to bring value to the world with this position at Tracksmith, with your advocacy work, while still being a runner. What were those years like? I think kind of like those, probably the past like 4-ish years. I have no clue like what was going on mindset wise. Like, were you thinking at the time when you stepped away from Nike, were you thinking like, I'm going to come back in the game, or were you separating yourself from the sport completely in order to recover yourself physically and mentally?
Yeah. So I think I'm honest to God, the poster child of what not to do. I
Oh,
think a lot of people, because I had my New York Times piece, are like, wow, she did the things. And the answer is hell no. I started working with Lindsay like 6 months after that came out. Your girl here has a lot of work she still has to do. But essentially for me, what like I'm really referring to is I left the program that I was with, the Nike Oregon Project, right after the Olympic trials in 2016. And the reason I left was because my current coach and the coach that I was working with while I was in high school and who was kind of advising me while Alberto was also writing the plans caught me cutting myself. And he called my parents and they were super freaked out. And, my parents were savvy enough to know that there were like clearly some things going on. I kept talking about food and it was just very concerning. But for a parent that isn't in the sports world and didn't like really know what to do, they honestly made me leave the team and said, you need to get out of there. This seems unhealthy. Like let's figure this stuff out. And I was in denial for the next 3.5 years about what was going on while I was on the Oregon Project.
were you even kind of mad at your parents?
Oh,
Yeah, you were mad because they made you leave.
totally, completely. And I think, the reason that I shared my New York Times piece when I did is not because, I was sitting on this knowledge for X amount of time, but it wasn't until I read that USADA piece in which Alberto Salazar got banned that I realized, oh, wow, all of that behavior that I had condoned by them and almost put on myself as a sign that I was weak, that I was the problem, that I was an issue, actually was abusive behavior. And until that moment, I never put a name to it. So the reason that for about 3.5 years, I really, really struggled is because I had trouble actually addressing what the issue was. And I think for me, as a result, a lot of my relationship was was very fraught, and I was stuck in this injury cycle and, constantly getting these bone-based injuries. And the first stress fracture I had, I said, no, I'm not too skinny. I'm fine. This was just a fluke. Something happened. And then the second one I got was very severe, and it was a femoral neck stress fracture. And it was in that moment that I accepted I can't handle running at this weight and I need to gain weight. Now, rather than taking that as some, almost positive, like, hey, this, now this is positive. Instead, I looked at it as a personal failure. And I looked at it as a sign that I couldn't be good because clearly other people didn't break and were even less weight than I was. And so I must somehow be bad because I break when I'm too skinny.
Mm-hmm.
And so
I think, if you don't mind me interjecting, kind of that mindset that to be a good runner, like you have to weigh less or be skinny. And so if you're going to break being skinny and you have to gain weight, then like being a good runner is impossible.
Exactly. That's exactly it. And so I think then what happened was during that femoral neck stress fracture, I actually couldn't run for 9 months. I was clearly in a place with my bone density where luckily nothing like I don't have osteoporosis right now. Luckily we were able to kind of reverse some of the effects that I was going through, but it was clearly not good because it was taking time for it to heal. And I couldn't run for 9 months and I was on crutches for 2. And I just kind of accepted this is going to sound horrible, but I was like, I guess I got to go gain weight. And it wasn't conscious, now things are going to be better because I'm not going to get hurt moment. It was more almost like a defeated, okay, I guess I got to get healthy now. That sucks. That was kind of the moment.
And I think a lot of people can resonate with that. There are definitely runners or athletes in other sports as well that can rationalize I would be healthier with more weight, but then they feel like that means they're giving up their passion and their dream for their sport. And so, of course, we're going to get there, but I just want to kind of fast forward. That's not the case.
Yeah.
That's the lie that we tell ourselves.
Exactly. And that's why I'm sharing this, is because right now, I know that. I totally know that. But I think it's really important for me to share this, because there are so many people who, since I shared my story, I think almost like look up to me in a way where I'm like, yes, if you're taking inspiration from my ability to share my story and talking out, like, please, please do. But if you're looking at my story for 1 minute and thinking, oh wow, she really knew what she was doing, she really took all the right steps. No, you're going to mess up. There's going to be bumps along the road. And I think the biggest thing that I've learned is that's okay. And the more times that you're able to maybe ask people who've either already been there before or who are professionals in this and ask them for help, and know that it's okay, that you don't have to do this alone. Because a lot of this, I mean, I'll be honest, was like me and my mom reading articles and, listening to YouTube videos and trying to find ways where I could continue to be healthy and run, but also gain weight. And it was kind of like home hacking it. I know, like, my mom is amazing. I love my parents, but they're not professionals in this. And the reason we maybe weren't going to a professional is because over my career, I did go to a lot of nutritionists or kind of pseudo nutritionists who would encourage me to lose weight and be like, yeah, that is a little big. And I'd be like, what?
It's like breaks my heart when you say that.
But I think that's the problem kind of with the very broad health industry, is that health is losing weight. And health is really defined by that. And health is also by like how you look on the outside. And I'll tell you right now, if I'm, right now in my life, I can honestly say I have typically ranged over the last year from 125 to 130 pounds. I weighed a little bit more kind of post-op recently, and I've since dropped a little bit of weight because I'm exercising more. I do not really weigh myself very often. Usually the only reasons I do is so that I can honestly tell other people my weight, so that they know, like, I am okay. I know I'm not underweight. But the truth is, I was expected to be 114 pounds. And the difference of 10 pounds isn't that much. And at different times in your life, your weight is going to fluctuate. But one weight, I, am confident, comfortable, healthy, menstruating, all of the different things, and not breaking down. And the other weight, I'm kind of irritable, sort of horrible to hang out with. I'm depressed and I'm hungry.
Yeah. And hungry. Yeah. So many good things you just said. Speaking of weight specifically, yeah, it's like 10 pounds. Our weight varies and fluctuates so much throughout life. So to some people, this might not be much of anything, but there is, like, for you, like you identified, that 114 number. First of all, as you've spoken about before, it was arbitrary. It kind of came from nowhere. It wasn't evidence-based. And then if you look at the symptoms and how your body's actually performing, that was an unhealthy weight. And so just 10 pounds more is suddenly, oh, okay, now my body's functioning appropriately. Now I'm not in this state of energy deficiency or red S, as you've spoken about a lot. And that's kind of what was going on at that time. So it's like, okay, 10 pounds might not be a big deal, or it might be when it's the difference between you being healthy or not.
Yeah. And I think, when you're in high school, throw those numbers out the window. Burn those numbers, never think of those numbers, never remember them. Because the truth is, my junior year in high school, I could have been any weight and I would have been fine. Like, seriously. And I looked good, right? Like, I physically didn't look ill. I didn't look, it was good. But my senior year, I was finally developing and things were starting to kick in. And it's almost funny for me to sometimes look back at past photos, because there are even times where certain parts of my body looked like usually my face looked really bloated during periods of time where I think I was restricting. And, elsewhere, like, probably since I was like borderline suppressing my development, like things looked a little off. And I think if you look at me now versus had I almost even like weighed this a few years ago, it's going to look different. And I'm probably going to look different at 30 than 40 than 50. And at different ages, you should be different weights. But I think one thing I always tell younger athletes is those college years, you probably should hold 5 extra pounds than be 5 pounds underweight. And I think for me, that at times really was the threshold. It really wasn't, again, 10 pounds in the scheme of things isn't that much, but it's literally the difference between me having, long-term effects like developing osteoporosis or being totally fine.
Yeah. I think that's really good advice to remember that when you are in high school and college, you are still developing. So do not be, at any stage of your life, you should not be married to any number on the scale, but especially in high school and college, like you're still growing and developing and you have to let your body do that. And trying to maintain a specific weight or a specific shape to your body at that time in your life can cause serious damage and long-term damage to your development as a human being. So, and as an athlete, I want to say as an athlete too, right? Because that's your story is then you had to press pause on your athletic career because of it all too.
Yeah. And I think just even emotionally and mentally, like I would be lying if I said the reason I don't really weigh myself is because I do get upset seeing the number. And even though intellectually I could stand on a soapbox all day and say, this is okay, I am healthy, this is good. As soon as I see it, I'm sad. And as soon as I see it, I feel like a failure. And that's something that I don't want a younger athlete to ever feel. And so for me, so much of this is if you can prevent somebody from ever going down these paths, then they'll never have to feel like me. And I'm still, very often uncomfortable running in a sports bra. And it sounds silly because I'm the poster girl of saying body positivity. But the reason I am is because I don't really feel that way for myself all the time. And that's part of the reason I work with Lindsay, who has been incredible teaching me so many of the, I think real science and almost like mental tips to be more confident. But I didn't take that step until 6 months after I shared my story because I finally realized I have to start walking the walk. I can't just talk the talk.
It's so powerful. And going back to your body positive, like you're the poster child for body positivity. I think the key here is body acceptance. And like, even though that's still another trendy word, but like the reality is nobody's positive about their body all the time, but it's where can we be more positive about our bodies? Where can we pull that in more? How can we express that more often? And in the times when we are not positive, how can we be accepting and understanding? And so we're still working on that, but I always say that things like body confidence is like showering. You have to do it every single day. You don't shower for a week, you're going to start to stink. And if you don't keep practicing on your body image and body confidence, it's going to start to stink. So it's something that has to be like worked into your life on a regular basis. And you do get better at it over time, but it does take time. It's not something that you can just say, love your body, and then you do. It takes work. And so both the body confidence stuff and the nutrition side of things, like you said, you and I started working together just this year, kind of after everything. And I really appreciate how honest you're being about the reality of those years in between and trying to figure it out, on your own. I think a couple things have been going on here, which is like, one, a lot of people get nutrition advice from the wrong people, from the diet industry, from social media, maybe not from the professionals. Obviously I'll just say mine, sports dietitian, right? And the second thing is just more knowledge about this topic. The truth is that Red S is a relatively new term. We started using it in 2014. And also just with the things like social media and dietitians like myself having their own private practice and getting on social media and talking about these things. I mean, even just 5 years ago, people weren't talking about this as much. And I'm so glad they are right now. We are now talking about the fact that if you're missing your period, even just for 1 month or 2 months, that's a red flag. And I really don't think those discussions were being had even just 5 years ago. So a couple of things going on there. And what I would like to know from you, Mary, is, for you, when did your formal nutrition education kind of begin?
Yeah. So I don't even know what to call this, but the first time I ever worked with somebody was the assistant coach of the program I was in's wife, who, would kind of just give like broad, like eat whole grains and veggies sort of stuff. And she wasn't a nutritionist. I think she was, I don't remember exactly what her role was, but like, it was the sort of thing where, it's, if you're dealing with somebody who keeps coming to you saying, I have amenorrhea, I haven't gotten my period in a year, I, am depressed, I'm like, irritable all the time, I'm hungry, I'm scared to eat stuff, and you're telling them to eat whole grains and veggies, it's not super helpful. And so,
So being told to eat whole grains and veggies all the time isn't helpful.
Just the sort of stuff where it was like, honestly, like my mom and I were able to look more stuff up later in life, more helpful things. But I think, that experience of working with what many called like the highest end team and the best program and science first and all this, we know BS jargon now, it was kind of, I think, hard to, after that experience, maybe really, like I had trust issues. And I think part of it then was, as a result, I think it's very easy to seek out people who will tell you what you want to hear. And I was in a program in which the coaches were there to, just say yes and just do what the head coach said. And they were all in on on everything. Anybody who acts like otherwise is lying. And when you just have a bunch of yes men, nothing's ever going to get done. Nothing's going to be productive. And I think kind of from there on, I was almost like wanted to find somebody who could help me lose weight and still be healthy. Like, I think that was almost the goal, because I was like, clearly they think I should be eating my whole grains and veggies, and that's not enough. I eat a salad every night for dinner, and clearly it's not doing anything. And so I think when you're almost also a little unwilling to accept that you have a problem, I think that's part of it too, where I had some doctors who would say like, hey, you're probably underweight, like maybe you should stop running. Well, that's not helpful advice. So
No. And you were also so young. Like you said, you did a lot of learning what was going on in the aftermath and on your own. Like if you have one person kind of casually saying like, oh, you're a little underweight, like that's not enough to convince you. I think, with some, I work in collegiate sports too. There are sports dietitians working at collegiate universities, and they have protocols and they have screenings for eating disorders, and they will not let somebody on the team if they have low bone mineral density, if they're showing signs of an eating disorder. And it's almost like, and that is the wake up call for those athletes. It's sad, it's tragic, but it's also like, well, this performance team is doing the best thing for you. And they're also going to care for you and get you in the right hands for treatment. It's like, if that wasn't happening for you, if somebody's just casually saying like, oh, maybe you need to gain weight, like
that's the thing. And I think with a lot of this, part of it just came down to, part of the reason I specifically talked about Reds versus the female athlete triad is I think we've come a long way in terms of sexist judgments against athletes, bluntly. When I first had my first ever injury, they were like, be careful. Like you don't seem to have it. And at the time I didn't have any sort of eating issues, but they were a little bit like, hey, be cautious. And then, 2 years later, when I had the first injury of this injury cycle, I ended up going on in November of 2016. They were like, you're on the athlete triad, eating disorder, low mineral bone density and stress fracture. Like, good job. You're kind of like, nobody has ever said the word eating disorder to me.
Eating disorder.
Ever.
It almost implanted it into your head at a time when it didn't need to be.
And I'm like, I haven't told you anything. You are actually just making an assumption. And at the time, I totally had an eating disorder. Like, yes, I did. But if you're just jumping to that conclusion because you see a skinny girl who's like crying because she just found out she had a stress fracture, and you're going to say like, well, you got an eating disorder. Like, that's almost going to make me combative. And that's almost going to make me say like, this triangle feels like BS because you can't make these assumptions. So when I told my New York Times piece, I very specifically chose reds. And I think the reason is because it's a conversation opener.
It is.
In a way really rigid triangle isn't. But telling somebody you have reds, there are people who are on that spectrum who don't have an eating disorder.
Mm-hmm. A lot of my clients do not have eating disorders.
Yeah, you can totally just not necessarily have the right diet for what you need. It doesn't mean you're trying to restrict, but you can be on it. There are other people who have severe eating disorders who haven't broken a bone yet, and they're on the spectrum. So I think the more, I'm personally somebody who feels the more you can be inclusive of others, and the more there's almost a caringness to how you're projecting the message, the more likely you're going to have a recipient who feels seen, who feels heard, and is receptive to, kind of maybe facing the hard facts. But I think for me as an athlete, it was either people telling me, eat my veggies, really harshly saying I had a problem, and never following up, like never being like, hey, how you doing? So I was almost on just these two very like eclipsing points that made it very difficult to understand, I think, even for myself, what was happening. And that's why the real answer for what I've been doing the past year is probably going on a journey of, both kind of reflecting on my past and also trying to learn from it so that I can grow in the future to, get some of these figurative monkeys off my back and feel like a little bit of weight's been lifted from my shoulders of, I think, some of the maybe like mental and emotional trauma I've had over the last few years.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And there's no time limit for that either, right? Like that's what you've been up to this past year, but however long it takes for you to feel good again, mentally, emotionally, physically, like that's the most important thing that you can do for yourself. Bringing me to tears.
Oh, thank you. I mean, I think for me, part of the reason I'm doing this, and it sounds silly, but it's because I'm like, if I have a daughter 20 years from now, I don't want to accidentally project all of this shit onto her. That's what this is. And I almost don't want her to look at her mom and see somebody who's, pushing aside the pizza slice or not eating breakfast or, trying to caffeinate themselves like to get through the day, like making the steps so that they can see somebody who eats well, is confident in how they look. And no matter what my future child chooses to do, that they know their mom's going to be cheering for them on the sideline no matter what.
Yeah. That's beautiful. And it is such a motivator. It's one thing to do things for yourself, and it's like another level of motivation when you do things for other people, even the theoretical other people, like your future children. And, I think for me too, in why I decided, as a sports dietitian, I've helped lots of different types of athletes, and, running is my personal passion, but that is one reason that I kind of settled on my business, Rise Up Nutrition, on doing exactly this, on helping female athletes overcome disordered eating, is just because, like you said, like if you could prevent one person from feeling this way that you feel, that is so powerful. And going back to words too, I know it's just literally just swapping the words, but that's one reason I say disordered eating and not eating disorders, because quite frankly, in the society that we live in and diet culture that exists, like most people have some disordered eating habits, thoughts, behaviors, whether it causes harm to their life or not. And of course, it's when it is causing harm, whether it's that spectrum of red S or just the mental like relationship with food. Those are things we want to address. But I think everybody can learn nutrition in a healthier way, in a more positive way, in a way that is setting a good example for other people, in a way that you can eat a pizza and enjoy it and not think twice about it, you know? And I think that's important for everybody, including athletes. And so that kind of leads me to my next question for you, which is, you know, as an athlete, where nutrition is important as an athlete, and we've been working together now. So, like, what are some ways that you're moving forward with your nutrition as even still like with thinking about performance nutrition, or do you have to think about performance nutrition? Like, what's your approach to nutrition now?
So I think a really big thing is that I've learned what I like and I don't like in terms of to eat. So, for example, I'm somebody who I tend to prefer like a sweeter breakfast, whether that means like having a bowl of oatmeal, making a smoothie, something kind of like that. And in the past, I used to almost like force myself to eat eggs and like a salad for breakfast. And I just realized, you know, the difference between the two is not incredibly substantial in terms of any of the kind of, caloric otherwise. And maybe I need to lean more into having protein or fibers or something like that earlier in the day. But I almost have my set, like these are the things I like to eat, and I lean into it across the day. And therefore it just gives me a little less maybe opportunity to overthink it. And then if I do choose, like we're going out for dinner, then hell, I'm just going to look at the menu and I'm going to lean into whatever I want. And when it comes to the performance side, I think really the big things for me that I've been working on is one, eating more consciously around my cycle and really kind of like the difference between your follicular and luteal stages and how I should be like post-run or pre-run eating. I'm a pescatarian, so I do have to be a little bit more conscious to like make sure I'm consuming iron through food and having my proteins. So it's not that I'm not like actively thinking, hey, put in that scoop of protein powder, or hey, I haven't had anything green all day because I've had 2 smoothies, like maybe a denser dinner. So I do try to really kind of, be proactive and think about it and plan ahead. But a lot of it is more just taking out the bad food term and realizing that, like, you know what? Sometimes if you just want to put like a couple of chocolate chips like on top of your acai bowl, like it's probably just going to make you smile and feel a little better for the next couple hours and shouldn't take away from the rest of your day because you felt guilty about eating those chocolate chips. And so these for me, I think I had come to a point where I knew a lot of the, like, I know to eat my veggies and whole grains. Like,
Yeah, you've been told that a time or two in your past. So.
I kind of already know the quote unquote good foods, but I think the big thing now is knowing nothing's actually a bad food. And it's okay to sometimes lean into cravings. And you know what? If it's like an hour before a workout, like maybe not do that because I'm going to get an upset stomach and, X, Y, and Z. But in general, just maybe taking a little bit more of the emotions around eating and learning how to make them positive versus negative.
Such a good answer. And I like how you said too, it's like, okay, I'm figuring out the foods that I like, that I want. All foods can be good. There are no bad foods. But as a high performing athlete, it's just figuring out kind of what are the gentle nudges almost.
Yes, exactly.
And yeah, I can eat ice cream. That's not a problem, but I'm probably not going to do it right before a workout, because I am going to have a different priority. There's like a priority for your fun foods and maybe a priority for foods that you kind of need. Oh, I need more protein in my diet today. I haven't quite gotten enough. But you can have it all. And it's the power of you choosing what foods you want when. That's where the real power comes from.
And I think one thing I've always been really bothered by when it comes to athletes is we love to use the word sacrifice. Like, it's weird. And don't get me wrong, I'm sure at some point have said it in, regards to like, I didn't eat the ice cream because I had to work out in an hour, like a sacrifice. But in general, a lot of this stuff is just making a choice. Like, I'm probably not going to have a glass of wine the night before a hard workout. Like, we're just probably not going to do it. And is that a sacrifice? I don't think so. I can get a Sprite and feel all bougie doing that. Like, we're,
Yeah.
we're all, you know, I think, though that terminology comes from feeling like being the word sacrifice comes from athletes feeling like they almost want to be doing something else if they could. And the more you set yourself up that you don't actually feel you're missing out, because you know what? I'm not eating an ice cream at night. But God, those morning smoothies I make, I mean, they might as well taste like ice cream. And it's protein powder, bananas, like all this really good stuff. But because I'm having that, I don't feel like I'm missing out. And I'm almost trying to make life choices, whether around my food, around the people I surround myself with, around my job, where I never want to feel like I'm missing out, because then I think it just takes away from your athletic performance because you say things like, I'm making sacrifices versus I'm making choices.
I think that's so huge, making the choice instead of the sacrifice. Same thing with like, I think sacrifice, the word that I hear a lot of my clients and athletes saying too is like discipline. Like they feel like if they're not disciplined with their nutrition, then they're doing something wrong. And which is why like this whole concept of like intuitive eating and figuring out the foods that you like it actually is something that you have to like learn and you have to practice it, because if you are an athlete who feels so regimented, I need to be disciplined, I have to make sacrifices, or you talked about it before too about how like some athletes will just do what they're told, like just tell me what to eat and I'll eat it. And it's like, actually the best way is if you can figure out the nuances of what do you want to eat. And such a simple question takes time to figure out.
Yes. And I think that's why with anybody, I always just encourage them to try new things. And I also am going to say something that's maybe people will feel otherwise, but don't get your nutritional advice from athletes. Don't. Because you know what? Go to a nutritionist, go to their Instagram page. Don't be getting it off of X, Y, and Z athlete who happens to also cook. And it's not to say that they don't have incredible recipes that are good, but it's more, one of the things I really loved about Shalane Flanagan's cookbook is she worked with an actual nutritionist dietitian who could say, yeah, this is actually the right way to go. And I think being able to lean on people who have expertise is super important because you don't know anything about anybody else's journey. And the number of pro runners who are gluten-free and like all these different things because they act like they have allergies. And I'm like, if you have disordered eating, you're probably having trouble digesting foods. Like, if for those of you out there who have similarly overcome disordered eating, you suddenly learn, oh my God, I can eat bread. It doesn't kill me. It was just the disordered eating that was. So
yes,
this is all just to say, go to experts for expert advice. Follow runners for running advice. That's my little 2 cents.
It's so good. Although we could even argue, like, are the runners getting their advice from a coach though? So maybe get a running coach.
Well, and I think that's part of the thing. That's actually very fair. Very fair. Because and again, this isn't, I'm sure a lot of athletes are working with professionals. I work with Lindsay, and sometimes if it's just like a random smoothie recipe, great. But if you're almost trying to get your advice through Instagram, and when I say run, this is a broad spectrum of all of the different, health and wellness warriors on Instagram who post pictures in bikinis. Like, maybe don't go to them.
Yeah. Don't go to them.
I had to do a lot of unfollowing.
Well, and this is great advice. And it's huge too, because as we were kind of getting out before, I think we answered, and then our conversation amazingly went a different direction. But like you, even as a professional runner, never really had formal nutrition education or nutrition guidance from a dietitian. I think, am I correct in saying I'm the first dietitian that you're working with, or sports dietitian?
Yeah, I think so. I think a lot of people have been nutritionist, or in the case of the assistant coach's wife, I don't know what she was.
Yeah, and this is a thing because health and nutrition information is so widely available, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's right or that it's coming from a professional or that it's right for you. And so it is something to proceed with caution. And Mary, I'm just grateful that after everything you've been through, that you are now like this year, so many amazing things happening for you and moving forward. That's the phrase that I've been really clinging on to lately. And I think it's perfect for you. It's just moving forward. Okay. Like surgery. How can I move forward with surgery? Nutrition. How can I move forward with nutrition? Whether it's because of or in spite of what happened in the past, how can I move forward to be the best version of myself and my whole self as an athlete, as a worker, as an employee, and as an advocate for these things that I care about in my life. It's amazing to see all you've done in the past year. And I think you're going to continue to do so many more amazing things in the running community and beyond.
No, I really appreciate you saying that. And I also, of course, appreciate, Lindsay, all of the help that you've provided over the last, I guess it's been maybe 6 months or more of time that we've been working together. And I think, even having just this extra level of confidence myself in some of the conversations that I've been having around issues like nutrition, I think, again, working with a professional is something that I really wish my younger self had done. I just totally honestly, like I've told people, I wish I had gone to a rehab center back when I was like in the throes. And I think that's something that it's really rare for people to hear that. But I just want anybody who's out there who is maybe struggling or themselves kind of wondering, do I have something? Talk to a professional and, find the right one, find somebody who you feel comfortable with and, who's going to support you, but definitely find somebody who knows what they're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. That do I have something going on? Well, if you talk to someone, you'll nip it in the bud real quick, right? So it's
like one of times I talked to my therapist and I've gone in and she's like, Mary, there's something else here. And I'll be like, no, don't look at my soul like that.
Yeah. Well, I want to finish our episode today with some kind of rapid fire questions, just some quick things. So, Mary, if you have a favorite food, one that you could eat every single day for the rest of your life and never get sick of it, what would that be?
I think it would be my morning smoothies. I've already talked about them like 4 times, but like, I don't know. I just love like frozen banana. Makes everything feel like you're eating ice cream. Some days if you're feeling like I need a little bit more, you throw some granola on there, scoop of protein powder. I just think it sets me up where I get enough fiber and protein. And I feel like from the get-go, I can eat bread the rest of the day. And I've almost had like a little bit of a treat in the morning. I think it just sets me up more for success.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Your morning smoothie and tasting like ice cream.
Yeah. It tastes great, but it's good for you and it sets me up.
Now, obviously, you're a runner, but what is your favorite spectator sport? Is it still running or is it something else?
That's actually a really good question. I love watching the Tour de France, like, and all the cycling competitions. I think I enjoy it because it's what running should be, but running is horribly run and pun intended. And therefore, like, you never see anything when you watch it on TV. And I'm also a big swim fan. I love swimming and I love soccer. So I think my boyfriend likes watching all Michigan sports and I always drive him crazy because I'm like, I only like watching sports that support women.
Which my next question is, if there's a female athlete that is a role model for you or that you look up to and are inspired by, who would that be and why?
Definitely Megan Rapinoe. First off, she's been incredibly kind to me over the last year. We kind of got to know each other because she had reached out after I came out with my New York Times piece, and we got to hang out during the Sports Illustrated Person of the Year award party that she won. And then otherwise, just at different points, has been incredibly encouraging. Even when I told her I was having surgery, she's like, sometimes you need that. All good. So I think that personal kindness is, a big part of it. But then beyond that, the reason Megan Rapinoe matters is because of what she does off the field. Her ability to perform on the field is incredibly important because it gives her that platform and she loves it and it's fun. But we will remember Megan Rapinoe 30, 40 years from now It's the athletes who just stand by and think that athletic performance matters and don't realize that it's how you use your athletic performance to find a voice that I think, those people should be looking at Megan Rapinoe and taking some notes.
Yeah, that's awesome. And then last question, out of everything we've talked about today, which we've talked about a lot and it was great, what's one thing that listeners can kind of take action on right away? If there's, out of everything we talked about, something that you would want listeners to kind of grab onto and take action on that will change their life, what would that be?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is, when in doubt, talk to a professional. I think for me, the reason I was stuck in a cycle for like 4 or 5 years is because I was talking to people who really weren't. And there were some along the way. It's not if anybody's listening to it and was like, I was good. Yeah, I'm sure you were. You know who you are. But I think in a big way, we fear truth as a society. We feel being told you are wrong. There is something else. You need to address it. And don't fear truth. Truth is incredibly powerful. Sometimes it can be hard to hear. Sometimes it can make you sad. Sometimes you could wish it wasn't true, but knowledge is power, and, truth is knowledge. And so I think a really important thing for all athletes and for everybody out there is that always talk to somebody. And maybe you don't even think you have a problem right now. Maybe you're really new to running. You're like 12 years old. You've just gotten into the sport. You know what? I would recommend that you find somebody, you develop a connection now, because then it's more likely that they're going to be able to prevent you from falling into, falling off the cliff like I did. And, for older athletes, if you're like, hey, I have had some stress fractures over the years and I don't think I have anything, but it never hurts to ask for help. It never hurts to get advice, and you never know what you might learn through it. I know working with Lindsay, it really opened my eyes to a lot of the, I think, kind of fears around food that I still harbor. If you watched me on a day-to-day, you would probably give me a thumbs up when it came to how I eat, but that didn't mean the thoughts in my head were healthy. So really just taking a moment and picking up the phone and calling somebody and setting up time to really get that expert advice is, I think, the biggest thing for me.
That's great advice, Mary, to seek help from a professional, even if you're unsure if you even need it. It doesn't hurt. So thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing everything, sharing your story. And we're excited to continue following you and see what 2021 brings your way as well.
Oh, no. And thank you so much, Lindsay. This has been really, really great for me. And I think, sometimes talking it through is good for me, because it even will remind, really kind of set my intention for the next couple days to, again, walk the walk and not just talk the talk.
There you go. Perfect. Wow, I could have kept talking to Mary for another hour on all of these topics. I do really want to highlight, though, I love that our conversation was more so about Mary right now, but I do want to encourage you, if you haven't heard Mary's story of things that she struggled with in the past, and if you haven't watched or read the piece that she came out with the New York Times last November 2018, then I strongly urge you to do so. I will include the link to that original piece in the show notes. And I think it's just really telling, Mary's been a great advocate for talking about eating disorders, disordered eating, Red S specifically, and mental health, and just the treatment of athletes. And she's been on a ton of podcasts over the past year. And seriously, I encourage you to listen in on them, because in some of those other shows, she might go deeper into exactly what was happening at that time in her life. And I think it's something that we can all learn from and grow from. So I encourage you to do that, and then continue to follow Mary as she does move forward with her life and doing all of her amazing work. If you want to connect with Mary, you can find her on Instagram at Run Mary Cain, and I will include that in the show notes as well. But most importantly, I really do hope that you take her advice of taking action on seeking professional guidance. Whether it is something that you are very aware of, this is Red S or this is disordered eating, or if it's maybe not so obvious and it's just that I'm not sure what I'm doing with my nutrition, I'm not sure, if I'm doing things right, take her advice and seek that professional guidance. That's exactly what she is doing with me and what I am doing with so many other clients. And I always have room for more. So I am so excited for you to take professional runner Mary Cain's advice and pick up the phone and give me a call. Head to www.riseupnutritionrun.com to learn more. And we're just going to have a quick phone call. That's where you can book a call with me and just chat about what's going on and see if or how I can help you. Great advice by Mary, and I'm looking forward to chatting with you as you follow her lead and take her up on this advice. So click those show notes and head to my website, and I'll talk to you soon.